So if you had a biology problem, would you ask a chemist or a pharmacologist? No, you'd ask a biologist, right? And how do you know what? Well, you know what the phenotype of a biologist is. If you've got a machine learning problem, why aren't you asking a machine learning scientist? And to a large degree, machine learning scientists are very hard to interface with because they're all working at Meta and OpenAI, and they're being paid more than like big pharma CEOs, right? So it's very difficult to get that level of scientific depth and rigor working on your program, even if you are a large pharma, because even if you could pay that, you wouldn't, because it would completely.
I'm Kostas.
Hi, I'm Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE, the Canadian Healthcare Podcast. Hey, Kostas, you know what? We've been talking about, probably everyone in the entire world now is talking about AI, right? And everyone always says AI is probably where it's going to make the biggest difference for people is probably in healthcare. And I think we probably have the perfect guest to help us understand how AI can be used in both healthcare and actually in the drug development process. So we're very fortunate today to have a fellow Vancouverite in the house. We have Handol Kim. Handol is the CEO of Variational AI, a company that's based in Vancouver. So Handol, welcome to the episode.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Lester, Kostas.
Thanks a lot. So for those of us, or those billions of people that are watching this podcast, of course, with you being on, that's the goal, that are not familiar with your organization, your company, maybe you can speak a little bit about Variational AI and sort of what the organization does.
Sure. So we are a Vancouver-based startup. We have developed a foundation model for small molecule drug discovery. The platform is called Anki. And what Anki does is very similar to what a diffusion model does for image generation. So if you've ever played with, Stable Diffusion or with Midjourney, you type out a text prompt, and then whatever you type out, it can create an image that fits the text prompt. We basically do the same kind of thing, but instead of text to define the image that you want, we use a language of chemistry. And so we use chemical property definitions that are usually contained in something called a target product profile. And in this case, it's a preclinical target product profile where a biotech or a pharma company is looking to generate sort of early stage, leads and then optimize these leads. And if they achieve these TPP metrics, then they move forward and nominate the drug to go into further development and then eventually into the clinic and hopefully into the patient population. So what we do is essentially take that target product profile, which is usually quite detailed in terms of the properties that you want in a small molecule, and we generate a molecular structure based on that requirement. And so because we can do it like a foundation model, because we can do it on a pre-trained model, it's a lot more efficient, it's a lot faster, but more importantly, it's able to generate novel chemical structures. And for all those chemists who are out there who have a biologist who says, hey, we figured out that if we inhibit this, protein, that due to this mechanism of action, we're going to be able to, cure diabetes or something. And now all you have to do, chemist, is make me a molecule that does all of these things. And then the biologist goes, okay, I'm done. I've done the hard part. Of course, the chemistry is also really hard. So biology is extremely complex. Finding out whether or not that target is good is a massively difficult proposition. But that kind of trivializes the difficulty of finding a small molecule. In our case, we only do small molecules. In biologics, it's a bit different. So we help the chemists. And so that's really what we do, is we are AI for generative chemistry. And it so happens that we focus on therapeutics. And we can do this we're target agnostic. So we're not specific to any kind of indication or disease area. We are specific to targets. But the good thing about biology is targets can be implicated in a broad range of diseases. And so at first we started out with a bit of a focus on oncology, but then we went into immunology, you're into CNS, you're into all of these other disease areas, and now we're working on everything from atopic dermatitis all the way to obesity. And because our ability to design new small molecules with exquisite selectivity and potency and safety for any given sort of target, that really opens up a lot of white space for us.
Right. So a lot of this sounds familiar. So in a past life, or it seems like it's a past life, I did play a pharmacologist on TV, so to speak. And as I was learning my pharmacology, there was a thing, structure based drug design, right? And that
Yeah.
was at that point in time sort of the approach to doing exactly what you're talking about. So you take, like, use X-ray crystallography, you get this 3D structure of the target, and then you try to work backwards to engineer it. So I guess in this case, rather than having a chemist sit down and come up with, I don't know, 10 different structures that would fit that particular target, you can actually create like a much larger array for much, and sort of be able to modulate different sensitivities or different actions of those molecules that you're generating.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, uh, that's part of it. So, there's the structure-based drug discovery method, and then there's a ligand-based drug discovery method, and we actually will use both. So if there is a crystal structure and a co-crystallized ligand, and you're just trying to make a better, molecule, we'll use that. We do train on that. If there's just a crystal structure, we'll train on that. If you've got cryo-EM, we'll train on that. If there's homology, we'll train on it, right? And if you're really kind of desperate, we can train on like AF3 or whatever. But the fact of the matter is most of the predictive power of our model and our approach is largely based on the ligand-based side. So we don't need this exquisite three-dimensional, sort of like high resolution concept of the target and the binding pockets and everything like that. If they're there, of course, we'll use them, right? But where we get a lot of power is really on, we know what ligands have bound to the target. How they bind to the target, it doesn't really matter as much, um, because we have that experimental data from all of the drugs that have been approved, that have been published, that have been patented, as well as a lot of computational data that we've generated. So we have these labeled samples of actual molecules and their experimental binding affinities, the potencies, the phys chem properties, molecular weight, et cetera, and ADME properties, and that in turn serves to train our model. So going back to that sort of diffusion model example, like, for example, if you were to type out, a picture of a smiling girl with short black hair riding a red bicycle over a bridge, Midjourney would be able to generate some really, really cool images that are diverse. They're not all the same, but they fulfill every single property. And that's because it's been trained on like gajillions of examples of girl, black, bicycle, smiling, etc. These are labeled samples. So it knows what makes a smile, a bicycle, a bridge, and it's able to make these new ones. And that's really what we do. We've trained on pretty much every single, sort of ligand that has been, and we have all of the labeled data. And so as a result, it's been able to go like, oh, okay, so this target product profile is different. Oh, you want this selectivity profile. Oh, and you want this and that. Okay, so now I'm going to generate that. And so it's different from sort of fragment based stuff where you start with the pocket and then you're trying to build. It's really largely based on the ligand side, but also with a lot of transfer from the structure. But it's a very robust model as well, and it can ingest and intake. It has already, because it's trained and ready to go. So it's very much a robust model that's able to generate good high quality leads very rapidly and efficiently.
Yeah. So Handel, the really one of the most important things for models is the data used to train. So what data is this? Are these like partners you've been working with bringing their libraries to you and saying like, hey, this is what we've done in the past? Is it just public data that we're using based on past filings or the literature? What are we using to train this type of a model?
So the preponderance of the data is data that's available in the public domain. So data on approved drugs, data on published drugs, anything that's been patented. So that's all available. So, you would consider that sort of the landscape of public data. We don't use, we don't just like pull down Campbell and stuff. And what we do use is we're quite picky about the actual experimental labels. So we train largely on all the data that exists around experimental, compounds. Certainly there's a lot of data that is locked up in sort of the coffers or the vaults of big pharma that are not available to train on. So in certain cases, for example, we announced a collab with Merck, and in that case, we'll be training on their data, and they're going to make that data available to us. We fine tune our foundation model on their data. We create a bespoke model which is only used for that purpose and that purpose alone. And once it's done, then we destroy the model, turn the data, et cetera, and we can't use that. And that's all fine and good. So in that case, we're able to leverage partner data, and there have been other collabs where the partner has had enough data to actually make a difference, but you need quite a bit of data, and biotechs in general don't have that much data. The definition of a lot of data for like a chemist versus a machine learning is several orders of magnitude, right? So and it's not just the volume of data; it's the quality and diversity of the data as well. So if you're doing sort of like SAR, you're not going to go too far each sort of time. You want to stick within your applicability domain. So you don't get a lot of diverse data unless you've been doing it so many sort of iterative cycles that you're able to start getting into novelty. But we really benefit from diverse data in addition to like the volume of data. And so here's where I'll get on a soapbox for a bit is a lot of people at conferences around AI for drug discovery will state that AI is never going to make a difference until you get really really good data, and the only way to do it is get proprietary data. And any machine learning person will tell you, well, of course, if there's way more data and good data, like of course it's going to perform better. The model's going to perform better. But it also is a cop out because the fact is that pretty much anyone who says that is not a machine learning scientist. And in the domain of drug discovery, 99.9% of the people who do AI for drug discovery are not actually machine learning scientists. They are comp chems or cheminformaticians or bioinformaticians who've learned machine learning techniques, biomedical engineers who learned about machine learning and can get quite advanced in it, but they're not actual machine learning scientists. And so machine learning is a science. AI is a science. We have people winning the Nobel Prize, right? Like Dennis Hassabis and John Jumper. You got Hinton as well. So machine learning is a science that is largely invisible to the domain of drug discovery, and that's because people who are PhDs in computer science and publish papers, at NeurIPS and iClear and ICML and whatnot. I mean, they, when you talk to a drug discovery person, very often they'll go, "Oh yeah, we're using really advanced AI." And it's like, "Oh, who developed it?" And you look at this and you're like, "Certainly, okay. So your PhD in computational chemistry, and that's awesome, and you've learned how to do this AI." But I always say to people, like, you're a pharmacologist, right, Kostas? If you had a biology
Yeah.
problem, would you ask a chemist or a
Yeah.
pharmacologist? No, you'd ask
Yeah.
a biologist, right? And how do you know what? Well, you know what the phenotype of a biologist is. If you've got a machine learning problem, why aren't you asking a machine learning scientist? And to a large degree, machine learning scientists are very hard to interface with because they're all working at Meta and OpenAI, and they're being paid more than like big pharma CEOs, right? So it's very difficult to get that level of scientific depth and rigor working on your program, even if you are a large pharma, because even if you could pay that, you wouldn't because it would completely. It's also not existential. Whereas to Nvidia and to Microsoft, they're software companies, and AI is existential to them. And the other thing is the market cap of Nvidia is greater than the market cap of all 20 of the top pharmas combined. So it's not like you can outspend big tech, right? So as a result, we see a tremendous opportunity of bringing contemporary and cutting edge machine learning into this domain.
Got it. Got it. Oh, that's excellent. I actually, can you guys hear me still? It,
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So maybe starting with one of the questions, because you mentioned this a couple of times, Handel, and assume that this is, billions of people watching again, so roughly a very general audience. Can you explain, you mentioned diffusion models a couple of times, like what is a diffusion model versus maybe another type of, say, model itself, right? And maybe we'll start from there first.
Well, rather than it might be more productive not just to focus on a diffusion model, but there are largely, to pull it back, in AI and machine learning, there are roughly two types of, I don't know, let's use terminology from biotech, modalities, right? But types of models. You have your discriminative, models, or your discriminative AI, and then generative AI. And ever since ChatGPT came out, everyone's generative, generative, generative. But in fact, generative is relatively new. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it hasn't entered the popular lexicon until recently. So if I go back to that, there is like deep learning that got kicked off basically in Toronto with AlexNet, right? And Alex Krzeczki, who was in Hinton's lab with Ilya Sutskever and everyone, and they, in 2011, 2012, they won the ImageNet challenge, which was out of Stanford, which essentially was like, on a set of data, can you do basically, image classification, right? And for a long time, results were mired until, the development of this deep learning type of phenomena, right? And then from then on, all of a sudden everyone started picking up because, oh my God, machine learning can actually do something now. And before that, it was the winter of AI and no one did anything. And if you were a smart grad student and you told your prof, like, I want to do AI, they'd be like, good, no, don't do it. You got a bright future. Like, don't throw it away. And so there was a real dearth of people who were working on machine learning. And then when it started to explode, there's such a scarcity of people. Now that's changing. Now people are studying machine learning at the highest levels. We have more graduates, and the state of the art continues to innovate really quickly. But back then, there weren't a lot of people doing it, and so as a result, you saw start this slow, gradual expansion. The University of Toronto, under Hinton, and then Joshua Bengio at UDM, and Mila, and then Rich Sutton in Alberta. I mean, you have three Canadian researchers. If there's a Mount Rushmore of AI, those three faces are on it, and then maybe Jan LeCun, right? And so the thing is, when that started happening, people started applying machine learning and they started using these discriminative models. And the discriminative models are things that classify, right? So you watch something on Netflix and then it's like, okay, what do I recommend to you? Like recommender systems, or like, you're applying for a credit card. Well, what rate do I give you? What's your sort of credit limit ceiling? You want to see if your chest scan has any cancer in it, right? Imaging, all of these things. People started using this, and we were off on our merry way from about 2017, 2018, and then all of a sudden, this generative thing happens. And now the difference between a generative model is not to classify, but is to create. And now people are losing their minds. And see large language models in the area of text, and then protein language models in the area of biologics, right? Diffusion models largely in the area of image generation, right? Flow models, variational autoencoders, which we named our company after because we started with VAEs. Restricted Boltzmann machines. There are a whole host of different models that are generative versus discriminative. And so when I zip back to sort of AI for drug discovery, frankly speaking, the report card is a mixed bag. So there have been a lot of companies that have come out with AI for drug discovery and have done things that are, interesting to underwhelming, right? At the end of the day, AI for drug discovery, companies that have come before us who started using discriminative models applied that to try and automate the concept of, discovery, right? So they're essentially using AI to accelerate virtual screening. So instead of having a docking score or having a scoring function that says, yes, this given molecule within my library may be a bioactive hit, right? And you're limited to maybe millions or tens of millions. Now using AI, you can have tens of billions of molecules in your library. And that massive library you throw against targets, and you're going to find different hits. But from then you still have to use good old fashioned med chem in order to kind of get to that optimized lead. So that's where we were up until 2020, 21. And then companies like such as us, I mean, in silico medicine is also using generative models, ICTOS, and I'm talking about companies that are doing this in the space of small molecules versus biologics. But everyone else was still very much discriminative model based. And as a result, you can kind of see a very, very big schism and a difference in between sort of what we're doing and what other companies are doing. And I will say there's a proviso here. If you're trying to develop your own pipeline and your own assets, then it's okay, right? It doesn't matter because you're not trying to do like 100 different targets at the same time. You're trying to do several small programs, and so you can focus on that. And discriminative models are good for that, right? But if you're trying to build a business where you're trying to redefine the unit economics of drug discovery, which is what we're trying to do, I mean, it's no good just if it's applicable on a small subset of a super family or this or that. It's got to be broadly applicable, and that's how you make a big impact. And so that's really the differentiation. And so when you talk about the use of generative AI versus discriminative AI, you can draw a through line here, and everyone is on this side, and there are a few companies on our side, and that's the sort of differentiation I would posit.
Thanks a lot for that. I like how you took it to another level, Handel. So that's of course why we have you on the podcast. But actually, on that note, right? The Sorry for a little bit of background noise right here. Got my dog here with me. She's like trying to get food. But on a separate note, there's a lot of areas in the drug development process or within drug development that probably can use improvement, right? So, how did you decide to choose the area to focus on that you did choose? Was it a combination of the technology and or was it more the problem driven? So, how did you choose where you wanted to focus your time and effort?
Well, so our origin story, has its root in the fact that the core team, the founding team, including myself, we worked at a company called D-Wave Quantum, and they're a quantum computing, pioneering company based in Burnaby, which is a suburb of Vancouver, and they're public now, and they've got a $13 billion market cap because quantum computing is hot. We were part of a business unit that was, working on probabilistic and generative models and AI, but not quantum. And so our business unit, which was called Quadrant, was really focused on the commercialization of machine learning apart from quantum. However, in 2019, D-Wave had to focus very much on quantum computing and said, hey, look, we're going to have to let you guys go and shut down the business unit. And so they said, go be free, do whatever you want, just don't do quantum computing. We said, no problem. And so we went off and we looked at molecular property prediction and optimization. We published a paper that had showed results that outperformed all the other, sort of benchmarks. People like Tom Yakala from MIT and Alan Asper-Guzik at the Matter Lab at U of T and Vijay Pandey at Stanford. And so we benchmarked it and like, hey, we're awesome. Let's go start a drug discovery company. And of course, this is why we don't trust benchmarks or anything because they're completely useless. So filled with this false, confidence born of complete ignorance, we thought like, yeah, that sounds really cool because who wants to do computer vision and this and that, and we want to do like molecules. And we were looking at other sort of applications of molecules like, you know, polymers, OLED materials, sense of fragrances, things because we were also like, well, we don't know anything about biotech. We don't want to kill anybody. So let's try and do this first. But then, we'd go and talk to these companies and they'd be like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Where are you going to get the data to train? And we're like, well, and they go like, you're not getting our data. And plus, how much data do you need? And we said, oh, like, yeah, I guess we could work with millions or tens of millions of samples. And they're like, like, sorry, man. Like, and we realized that it was still at that time very much an experimentally driven science, right? It's all empirical, right? And you don't need these fancy schmancy sort of like AI models to tell you when you could just work on the bench, use automated labs and get some really good signals. So we realized that that's not a good place to go. And then we reluctantly, because I knew enough about biotech that I knew nothing about biotech. So we're like, okay, well, I guess we're going into biotech because that's where the data is. Um, And we quickly realized that, yeah, there are a lot of companies doing this, and it's a very, very big problem, and that developing drugs is really, really, really hard. Um, and I'm surprised that any drugs actually get approved. It's just insane. That said, we quickly started learning about all of the challenges. And if there was a stupid tree, we fell down and hit every branch on the way down, and learned a lot of failures, a lot of testing and going like, hey, how come that? Oh, I guess that was completely wrong. To the extent where we made a lot of mistakes, and we're a lot smarter, or maybe I should say we're a lot less stupid than we were. But we're still very wide-eyed and aware of the fact that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. Yet at the same time, what's that saying? If you're in a group being chased by a grizzly, you don't have to be the fastest, just not the slowest, right? And so for us, we're very practical and realistic that we don't have to have solved drug discovery, right? And sometimes I read, commentary about like, yeah, they did this, but who cares? The real problem is that. I'm like, yeah, okay, but if you can solve parts of the problem at different stages, then eventually you get there. We're not saying that we have this black box and a genie that's going to create a drug. And I think a lot of people when they hear AI, they think of this all-knowing, all powerful sage that can just whip up molecules at the drop of a hat that are going to go into humans and have this wonderful, like, no, that's not what we're trying to do. It's not what anyone is really trying to do. So I think that it's that old saying: there's no silver bullet. There's just a lot of lead bullets. And so we focused on the areas and the parts of the discovery phase. We don't do anything about development. Like I don't know what's going on, but there are a lot of companies working in that, and that's awesome. And you're going to need a whole bunch of different um, approaches in AI in order to get there. And we don't presume to say that we've got an answer there. I mean, maybe we are really good at making these, like window openers move faster than normal, but we're not trying to build a car, right? And that Derek Lowe was who we're big fans of, said, "Well, drug discovery, you're just like making your window openers faster. Who cares? But making a car is like, well, we get it, right?" But the fact of the matter is I think like the biggest car window manufacturers are like $9 billion a year in revenue, and I was like, that's not bad, right? And so we're taking a very stepwise approach to all of this.
Great, great, great. No, that's great, and I can attest to the importance of a car window opener that goes down very, very fast. Because I used to own a car very recently that didn't actually have any AC either, so it was like
Yeah,
cranking that thing is like pretty. It's not easy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but so actually, since we're on this train, we might as well let's go down this journey with you because your career arc is you're not a biologist, you're not a biochemist, or actually you started your career working with I believe it's the Trade Commission, right, the Global Affairs Canada, and then you had a long journey within the tech space. Like how did that all happen? That's amazing, Handel. And now, of course, you're part of the one of the most preeminent AI companies, at least in the biotech space in Canada.
Well, that's mainly because there are, I think, only two or three of us in Canada left. That
I
said,
didn't point that out. I didn't want to point that out, but fair
that's
enough.
okay. I mean, Recursion came in and bought two of us like on the same day, right? So, you know, like Cyclica and Valence. Um, I'm frankly surprised there aren't more companies in Canada doing what we do, and we're always like there should be more companies. Um, and I mean, we would love to have more people in second, third, and fourth place. But that was a joke, of course. But going back, like I have no idea how my career took me to this area, but um, if anything, I think that really, if I were a VC investing in deep tech, my question would be like, why are you doing this? And I think that I finally, after a long period of time, I've realized that really, if you want to make science fiction reality, then you're good. You should go into deep tech, right? Anytime you're trying to do something that sounds so, wild and advanced and difficult scientifically or technologically, where you have a tremendous risk of failing in making the product, that's deep tech. And the impact has to be so great that the business model kind of almost makes itself. Like you don't have to worry about it. Like if I could turn sand at the beach into gold, then I don't have to worry about selling it. Like that'll take care of itself. Whereas typically in tech, your biggest risk is not in the development of a product. Everyone can make an MVP. You can make a layout on a chip. Question is whether or not customers are going to buy it, right? And so there's more of a market and adoption risk versus a technology risk. Certainly there are things in the middle. But deep tech is like, I'm going to make a transporter beam. And you're like, you know, imagine the applications. And like, yeah, okay, I can, but it's impossible unless you do it, right? So for me, I've always been drawn to the difficult. And I find that the more difficult the science or the technology, the harder it is to explain it and to translate that science into language that most people can understand. And not being a scientist and not being an engineer or an actual technologist has made me break down these concepts to a very simple set of analogies or models or concepts that I can then use to explain to pretty much everyone who wants to give us money or who wants to acquire the technology or the product. And a highly technical and scientific sale to another scientist, you still need to be able to break down in basic concepts and basic language what it is that you do and why it's important, because that scientist has a boss who approves a budget, and that boss reports to someone who's probably not a scientist, and even if they are a scientist, their shareholders are not scientists, and the analysts may be scientists but not really. You really have to kind of break it down. And I find that in my career of selling very technical, either software or deep tech or, semiconductor related products, that, if you break it down, this is my feature set and this is my price, it's really not a challenging sort of thing to work on. And also it's probably not as cool. And I think I have the best job in the world. I wouldn't trade it for any other job, because it's just, we're using AI to make drugs, man. I mean, that's really, really fucking cool. Sorry, I swore. Is that okay? Um, but it's really, really cool. And I think it's probably the coolest thing that I could be working on. But it's just been a series of sort of accidents and bad decisions and some good decisions.
That is terrific. And yes, don't worry, we'll be okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my question to you then is, I mean, to me, it sounds persuasive. It sounds like every pharma company should be using technology like this. Do you have everybody?
I'm gonna quote you. I'm gonna quote you. Every pharma should be. Yeah.
Everybody should be using this. No, so what has so far been the traction when somebody like Merck comes to you and says, "Hey, listen, we want to try this out. We think there's something here." What is creating the most traction for them? What's the value proposition that you guys bring to the table that makes it just a must-have for the future if you're in the pharma business?
Well, so you have to believe, right? So I think it's an understatement to say that AI has a lot of hype right now. I mean, it's just everywhere. And, I mean, no one likes the hype, except the hype helps you sell, or at least people are talking about it. But then at some point, the hype works against you, right? And so it's almost, you can't be in Kendall Square and launch a biotech now without having some AI or saying that we have AI, right? And so you got to say it even if you don't, right? Because every investor who doesn't know what AI is going to say, "Do you have AI?" It's like, "Yes." All right, checkbox. Okay, that person looks credible. And then, of course, they don't necessarily have AI, or they're using it on some peripheral sort of basis. Core AI still is really hard to find in drug discovery. However, everyone has heard the claims. Everyone is like, "Oh my God, it's magic." And then there are a lot of people who go like, "This is bullshit," right? Like they're not anywhere near, reaching these claims. And a lot of these claims are actually not made by AI for drug discovery companies. We're horrified when people go like, so and so said this, like, "Oh God, like, no, we would never say that." Like, but a lot of times you see a press release and some CEO of an AI for drug discovery company will have said something, and that becomes a headline. "We're going to cure all disease in 5 years." Like, whoa, what? Like, who would say that? And then sometimes it's like people like Sergey Brin or the CEOs of Microsoft's like, we're using AI, we're going to cure cancer, because that's the canonical use case. Whenever someone is asked, like, oh, aside from work slop and memes and deep fakes, what is the value of generative AI? It's like, oh, we're going to cure cancer, and I'm like, and then these articles that know nothing about biology will say like, oh, Sam Altman says that we were able to use this model to develop a biomarker that was like a million times better than the existing biomarkers for this sort of thing, and so ergo we're going to cure cancer. And they don't know what they're talking about. So a lot of the hype is created by the media who don't understand and are trying to get clicks, right? So it's not even us because like, why on earth would you say anything like that? That's just stupid. Um, at the same time, because of that, you see headwinds where you're like, oh, great, you guys, another AI. Tell me why you're different. That's the first question we get. What's the difference between you and everyone else? And you kind of have to look at the person who's asking that question, because really, can they actually understand the difference if I was able to explain it to them? Probably not, right? If I were to use a machine learning sort of definition as to why, and we've done this, and they go, well, I still don't understand why. I'm like, well, I just explained it to you, but you don't understand why, which makes us have to go back and start from first principles and explain in a very basic way. And scientists don't like that. Scientists don't like being treated like a toddler. And I don't know. Hey, just get to the, like, how do you, and you go like, but you have to go like, you wanted to know, right? And so the answer that I would normally give to a machine learning researcher is going to be very different because you wouldn't understand it. So if you can indulge me for 2 minutes, let me explain it in a way conceptually that you can understand what the difference is, because people still don't know the difference between a discriminative model and a generative model. Most people don't even understand that there is a difference, even people who purportedly use AI, right? So you have to fight against this perception that, oh, everyone uses it. The other then pernicious part of it is people have used it, and they've used it from a vendor, or they've hired people. Oh yeah, we had this like super smart kid. He was doing his masters, and he was he was this AI guru, and he came in and he built this thing, and it was like, it was okay. And you're like, wow. It's like, oh, we're a biotech, and I got this like master student to come in and develop a drug for me, and it didn't work. Surprise, right? So that's the thing, is they don't they people in the experimental sciences, and it's not just an AI. It's like any comp chem or bioinformatician, and they're often the redheaded stepchild of any sort of discovery organization, because, oh yeah, yeah, okay, all right, you computer guys, you run your models. Let's see. All right, if it accords with what I think, then I like it. If it doesn't, then I'm like, oh, forget that. I've got this experience. So there's a lot of complicated sort of nuance going in there. So the thing is, what we love to see is when we show our data, we show our performance, and people go like, yeah, but what's your experimental, like, do you have any experimental data? I'm like, this is all experimental. They're like, so you're telling me that you got single digit nanomolar potent compounds with selectivity in one cycle, and these are novel? Yes. So why isn't everyone doing it? Because we have to explain it. And they should be skeptical. People should be skeptical, because there are a lot of people who are out there saying that they do wonderful things and they don't, right? And so, of course, that's the biggest obstacle, is you give us a chance to show you in your program how we do it. And then whenever we have that chance, we're able to demonstrate. So it's very much a show me the data. That's what it comes down to. And that data has to be experimental, and that takes time. But we are getting a lot more traction. Yeah.
On like maybe the flip side of this is maybe not necessarily the customers or the prospects here, right? Like the pharmas and the larger biotechs, but how is your investor journey kind of been going? Is it when people hear, oh, AI cure cancer, sign me up, Handel. Do you want
Yeah.
$1 billion? Do you want $10 billion? $100 billion?
So here's an interesting phenomenon. Like, it depends. So we're at the intersection of AI and biotech, right? And then the investors who are AI investors and who are biotech investors, there's very little crossover, right? So you have life sciences VCs that invest in therapeutics companies, right? Then you have um, AI tech companies. And AI tech VCs, they don't invest in biotech because they don't understand biotech. But not only that, the risk profile is insane. They'd be like, I have to spend $500 million before I know if I have a drug and I could lose it all. Like, and there's no revenue in before that. And doing a
You won't
deal,
know for a decade.
right? And you don't want to do a deal because that's seen as bad. Like getting, like you only do an upfront when you need money to keep the lights on. Like otherwise you're signing away potentially this incredible asset, right? And the biotech VCs are kind of like AI, like what's the difference? And I don't understand the difference. Like they only have one question: do you have an asset, right? And if you do, okay, show me the asset. I don't care how you got there, right? But let's see the asset and let's see the data. And it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. And the platform that you use to get that asset is only there as sort of like padding for the next sort of act. Like you go public and you got a story on the street. Yeah, we have a platform. No one believes it until you actually have an asset that now what's your next thing? And so we have this platform. So a lot of people, you have a platform, you need an asset to validate that the platform works, and then it's all about the asset, right? So I would say like if I could draw a grid between like biotech, VC, tech VC, two rows, and then two columns, one asset model and the other platform model, right? Then it's like biotech and asset, check. Biotech and platform, X. Tech VC and asset, X. Tech VC and platform, check. And they don't match. And so there's a very small rarefied intersection in the Venn diagram where there are some tech bio companies that might be down to play with both, right? And it's so disingenuous because so many companies that are now therapeutics companies started off as platform companies, right? And so, but if you say, yeah, we're a platform, but we're going to do assets tomorrow, then they don't like it. Like you kind of got to play the game, right? You look at like Zymeworks up the street from us, right? You look at AbCellera over there. Everyone started as a platform company, but now they're asset companies. So it's biotech plays this sort of game, and so as we try and raise money, we kind of hit upon that sort of difficulty and being stuck in that sort of no man's land. And we're very grateful for the fact that we had really sort of far-sighted investors who kind of realized that like from a thematic and a thesis-driven perspective, that at some point we'll figure out what the best way to optimize value is. But to a large extent, we're a platform company now. We don't have assets, right? And we're not looking at developing assets in the anytime in the near future, unless it makes sense, right? So the fact of the matter is the ability to stay nimble and as you know, being in biotech, the market is really bad now. It's awful, and ain't no one funding companies. Hopefully, it's starting to change now, but there's been a real sort of dry spell. And if you had a company and you had an asset, going into the clinic, and you needed like a couple hundred million to fund your study, you could have gone public, but not anymore because no one's going public. We're starting very slowly, and people aren't writing checks for $300 million except for in very limited cases. And so, where are you going to go? All these companies are dying, right? And these assets are going to be hung out to dry. And so, the fact that we can run very lean, that we can generate revenue right now without sacrificing our ability to go after certain key targets because of our business model, this is a good thing. And if it ever turns, then of course, hey, we can go after assets, but that's really hard. That's really really hard. I'm scared, man. It's not for it's not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
Definitely. It on an extension of what Lester was talking about. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about sort of being a Canadian based company in this space, because traditionally there hasn't been a lot of support. I mean, it's been a tough go, but we've had, like you said, D-Wave is a great example of a huge winner in this ecosystem in Canada. So talk us through sort of what it's like being in this space now. Is it a positive because there just aren't many? Is it a negative not being one of these US companies being in their sites, or does it just not matter anymore?
So I think for investors in Kendall Square or Sand Hill Road, it doesn't matter, right? Whether you're Canadian or whether you're from Lithuania or whether like it just there are certain practical realities of time zone and travel and whatnot, but by and large, it's never been a problem for us. We have investors from Silicon Valley, we have investors from Seattle, we have investors here in Vancouver, and we have investors in different places. Never been a problem. We're a BC incorporated company. We're a CCPC. Never been a problem. No pressure to move to the United States. We have a wholly owned Delaware C corp. That's a sub of the parent. Never a problem. You talk about sort of these successes, and you cite D-Wave, and D-Wave was a success in spite of being in Canada. And here's what I mean is, D-Wave never got a cent of government support until like a few years ago under SDTC. No one wants to talk about SDTC anymore, but it was an honest one. And so now, you're like, oh, D-Wave, like, but when I was there in 2004 to 2005, I was like the first BD VP there. And I tried to do a lot of GR stuff, and we couldn't get any time from anybody, and not from the province, not from the government. It was regardless of what party was in power, just people were just not interested in helping. That's okay. And you look at a company like, I don't know, like General Fusion, right? You look at companies that are trying to do moonshots, they don't exactly get a lot of support, and you get a lot of lip service. And actually, there's a good audience around that are cheerleading from the sides, and that's great, right? But at the end of the day, we in Canada have this affliction where, anytime that there's a problem that's sort of like that we can't solve, we're like, the government should X, Y, Z, right? Why doesn't the government like? And it's our initial instinct. Why? What the government should like? No, the government shouldn't have to do all that. The government should create conditions around capital formation or taxation, or various other policies, childcare or health or what, or just try to make sure that real estate isn't so fucking expensive in Vancouver that we can't bring people because they can't afford to live here. And these are just normal things. These are like ecosystem, environmental things. That's what the government should be working on. Now, you want to start, tactically investing in certain technologies in order to change behavior. I'm all for that, right? But a lot of times, you don't want the government picking winners, right? Because you don't even want VCs picking winners. Except that's their job, right? And a big problem with that is the parliamentary democracy system that we have. Like, so let's say, for example, one party decides that they're going to create a fund and they go and invest in all of these companies. And let's say most of these companies die because it's hard, it's tech, that's just the way it is. Then you have an opposition person on the floor of whatever parliament or house or provincial legislature, like going at the government because they were stupid to fund this company. Like, come on. Like that's just wrong. But that's the climate we live in now. And it doesn't matter what party is in power and what's in opposition, they're going to do the same stuff. So is it surprising that a government is a bit reticent to kind of make bets? No, because there's no payoff. The payoff is like you get a company and they do really well. You can't win on that platform. You can't say, "Oh, we helped this company way back when they were seed, and now look at them." And it's like, who cares, right? The news people aren't going to care. You can't build a platform. You go door knocking and you go to constituency. Yeah, we help fund this. Like, I don't care. Like, what are you doing for my prescription drug prices? So it's a no-win situation. So any government that does that has to have sort of like, balls of steel, because they have to realize that this is a long-term bet with a lot of downside and little upside, but it's the right thing to do, right? And so when I think about that, like I'm sympathetic to anyone in government who's trying to do an innovation agenda, right? And because then you're funding this industry but not that industry. Oh, what about clean tech? Or whoa, what about life sciences? Or what about this? Instead of it's really hard. And so I'm sympathetic to government. At the same time, I'm a taxpayer, so I want a return on investment. So but it's just a really confounding sort of situation. But there's no disadvantage to being in Canada. If you're willing to get on a plane, or if you're willing to go down and knock on the doors and be aggressive, then there really isn't.
And how about bringing talent in, or I mean, are people willing to come or willing to stay in Canada? Or I mean, how are you?
Well,
Is it the magic of living in Vancouver?
so I mean, Vancouver is a nice place to live, except like when it rains, which is more than half the year. Um, I'll tell you this, un unsurprisingly, that it's been a lot easier to recruit people from America who are there on PhD visas from other countries. I mean, that's not
Yeah,
surprising, right?
yeah,
That's not surprising. Um, the way we look at it is, and COVID really did I think the world a favor in the sense, at least the working world, is that it got rid of this sort of this this shibboleth of like you need to be all everyone needs to be in the office all the time. Certainly there are some groups and some functions where you do want to be in the same time in the same place on a regular basis. I get that, right? But there are so many functions where you really don't need to be stuck in a car in traffic for an hour there and an hour back, right? And that's 2 hours of time that like is such a waste of productivity. And then people have lives. They need to go see the doctor. They need to pick up the kids, etc. So having a hybrid work policy has really been helpful for us. And so when we made the conscious decision that we're going to continue hybrid after COVID, then we said, like, it doesn't really matter where people work. Right? I've worked in big companies where, or not even big companies where, someone's on the fifth floor, someone's on the third floor. You don't walk up and go talk to them because they're probably not at their cube. You're going to call them or you're going to message them. You probably don't even see them anywhere, right? For days. So why the hell do you need to be in the same building, right? With your group, okay, I get that, right? But largely, we've arrayed work and definitions of productivity around this assumption that we all need to be there. And I think that's stupid. Certain functions and certain organizations, certain businesses, obviously that's not true. But for us, what we found is that we're able to balance the hybrid and the remote. Therefore, we have remote workers, and that increases the pool of talent. So we don't need to bring people to Vancouver. If they want to come to Vancouver and it makes sense, we're glad to have them. And we brought Americans and people with from third party countries into Canada that were in America, and that's fine, right? And I see that as a very practical solution to a problem. But we don't need to. We're not constrained to Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal or San Francisco or Boston. I mean, well, actually, continental North America, that's our only sort of thing because time zones, right? But other than that, it's like we can fish from many, many different pools. And we find that in when you hire people, especially in functions where they can be remote, that often they're quite productive. They're a lot more productive than if you had them come into the office all the time. Not for every case. So it's very much a pick and choose. But we've not had a problem like attracting talent. The last thing I'll say is a lot of that function is based on sort of like if you're benchmarking your compensation on your local ecosystem and you're trying to get someone from a different ecosystem, you can't pay what you would pay here for someone in San Francisco, right? You need to know that. So you need to pay San Francisco salaries, even though you're a Vancouver company. And that really hurts, man. That's very painful. But that's what you got to do, right? If you want to do that. And we certainly like, lost candidates where, we hire machine learning researchers that, come out of like top universities and top labs. They're really expensive. So the first question is like, look, what is, and they never really give you a straight answer, but then, when they tell you who they're interviewing with, you're like, okay, well, there's no way we can meet that, right? So, you kind of have to have a real early talk with them and align them on the growth potential of the equity and the fact that we're doing good things instead of selling more ads and work slot. So,
So that's great. So from what I'm hearing, Handle is incredibly pragmatic. And on top of it, no government handouts. That's a Handle doesn't need no government handouts.
oh no no no, hey, I'll take a government handout if it's offered to me. Okay, so let me nuance that. I mean, we use IRAP, we use Shred, we happily take that support, and it's necessary, right? But I guess what I'm more reacting to is sort of the attitude like the government should come in and solve all our problems, and that's a Canadian thing, right? Because when I worked down in the valley, no one ever sat around and said, you know what, the president should like. No one ever said that, right? The governor should like change this. Like no one ever said that. But in Canada, every time we're kind of in an industry thing, oh, the government. I'm like, oh, like we never talked about this in the Valley. You just go and solve a problem, or you try and get around it. Now that said, in biotech, you got BARDA, you got NIH, you got all these funding organizations and industries where it's critical and absolutely necessary to have that support, and that support is gone now. And we're seeing what the effects are going to be. And in 2 or 3 years, when all the VCs in America kind of go like, "Where's the science and where are the labs?" Like this is the legacy, RFK Jr. and these short-sighted policies to cut off research and choke off, people who are PIs and postdocs from different countries, right? There's going to be a real cost to America, and by extension, the entire industry. There is a place for government to do that, right? I was more railing against the attitude like the government should come in. But hey, like I'm just saying, if Mark Carney, wants to give me a lot of money to help eradicate cancer in Canada, hey, we'll do that photo op. I don't know any CEO in Canada who wouldn't. I mean, right? Regardless of what industry. So don't put words in my mouth, Lester.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I shouldn't have said it that way, but yeah, actually,
That's okay.
I'm gonna actually, you're probably the right guy to ask this question. Is in Canada, there's been a lot of, you could say, innovation from like an academic standpoint, right? Like you talked about Jeffrey Hinton, Bishop Energy, like the AI, a lot of the AI, kind of generative AI comes from research in Canada. And then, of course, in the past, the discovery, the isolation of insulin was all done at the University of Toronto. And that was just, you know, I just recently found this out after listening to a couple of different podcasts. Shout out to the guys that acquired an awesome podcast there. Is that was basically University of Toronto said, no, you can't commercialize this. And then guess who they kind of licensed the technology to? Two small little
Novo.
companies, one called Eli Lilly and the other
Yeah.
one called Novo Nordisk, which are the
Yeah.
two of the largest companies now, right?
Yeah.
So what, not to say that you're going to solve all the issues in Canada that kind of prevent from getting that type of innovation over into the commercial space. But do you have any sort of diagnoses of, hey, you know what, this is the part that really, really doesn't function well. If we kind of figure that out, and maybe we don't know the answer right now, but if we figured it out, it would really kind of unlock a lot of at least innovation to commercialization in Canada.
I think it's got less to do with the universities. I mean that's a call that I'm sure like a Berkeley has probably made, and like Harvard has probably made, kicking themselves for. But that's not really what their mandate is, right? It's not to commercialize research. Um, Starting to change now, right? So I think that's sort of standard across academia. And in fact, I would make the argument that some Canadian universities are a lot better at commercialization than even American ones, right? Like the University of BC is quite good at allowing their researchers to then have startups and do things, right? So I think the real root cause of translating, research into like blockbuster products, I think that really comes down to sort of the character, not the character, but the ambitions of entrepreneurs in Canada, right? So, and that runs a deeper sort of cultural sort of thing, in the sense that we had that thing on CBC, the 100 greatest Canadians, right? You remember that, like who and I don't recall who the greatest Canadian was, but I think it was Terry Fox, and any day on
No,
some
Tommy
twice.
Douglas. Tommy Douglas. I just did an
Oh
episode about it with so.
yeah, and a great Canadian, and socialized medical care is awesome, except when it's not. That's a different story. But you know you know were there any entrepreneurs or business people on that list? No. But I'll bet you if you did a 100 greatest Americans episode, that someone like, a Bill Gates might be on there, or someone. And here's the thing is when I used to travel to America and pre-clear customs at YVR, and you go, and I worked at D-Wave, and they'd say, oh, where do you work? I go, I work at a company called D-Wave. And they go, what do they do? I'm like, oh, we develop quantum computing systems. They're like, oh, that sounds really advanced. I go, yeah, it is. They like, and I just say, they go like, oh, how do you spell the name of the company? I go, D-Wave. And they go like, are you guys public? And so what I realized is the guy's looking for a stock tip, right? And I'm like, no, we're not public, but like he's like, okay, yeah, all right, cool. And then I come back to Canada, and it's like, and they'd be like, did you buy more than you're supposed to, right? Do you have like a carton of smokes in there or something like that? I'm like, just like, no, man, you're optimizing for different sort of things, right? And I think that in Canada, we're always suspicious, and there's a general hostility, if not, like superficial hostility, a latent hostility to anyone who's really rich, right? In Canada, we don't like really rich people, whether it's a Galen Weston or a Chip Wilson or whatever. And their personal characters aside, I'm sure some of them are assholes and some of them are great people, right? Just really, I don't know. I don't care, right? I'm not going to be friends with them. But the fact is that there's a general sort of suspicion. If you're really rich, then you must have done something bad. In Canada, we're suspicious of outsized, commercial success, right? Sometimes it's warranted. Other times it's not, right? But in America, it's very different. It's like, hey, you did it. Good for you. I want to be like you. How do I do what you did? And so as a result, when you're an entrepreneur, it's almost like scandalous to say, yeah, we'd love to be a multi-billion-dollar company and exit and like be massively successful. And then there's questions like, and then what? What would you do with all of that? I'm like, cure cancer? Like I don't know, right? But it's very like but the point is that if I, as an entrepreneur, create value and create jobs, right, and I exit for that amount of money, that money, short of taxing, we should pay our taxes for sure, pay our fair share of taxes, right? But then after that, it's none of your fucking business what I do with my money. I made it, right? I don't come in and tell you how to spend your money. But in Canada, it's like, and I've heard people say we should outlaw billionaires. I'm like, oh, okay, like on what? Okay, that's fine. No one should have that much money is a common thing that I hear. But what if they completely changed an entire industry, right? Why should they not, reap the benefits of their hard work? And the other thing is it's really hard. It's really, really, really hard to start a company, to make a company successful. And people don't understand the personal sacrifice that goes into it. So now, obviously, like you want engines of growth and prosperity and innovation, but we don't celebrate the successes. We vilify the successes, especially the outliers, the great successes. And if we don't have great successes, we don't have examples that other people can follow. And then we end up sort of like shooting for mediocrity. We sell too early. Instead of not going for that $100 million exit and saying, no, I want $1 billion, you sell for 100 million. Because what would I do with all that money? Then people are going to hate me because they think I'm an asshole. So the whole culture kind of is rooted in not at best I can say is people don't want to celebrate success at that level, right? Hockey is a different story, this, that, the other thing. But then inevitably, someone's like, well, why are they being paid $40 million a season? Well, because so we have this weird thing in Canada where we really don't celebrate outside success in a commercial or business way, and then we wonder why we don't have all of these successes, right? Maybe it's a culture shift and especially in this whole sort of elbows up thing where, well, we do need national champions, and who's going to start these national champions, right? People who come from different countries, immigrants, which is great, right? Yeah, I'm technically an immigrant. I was born in Korea, right? I grew up here, but I'm Canadian. But like, so who else? Like, if we in Canada don't make these companies in Canada that are globally, competitive, and one of the sort of, uh, you know, resulting phenomena is that you become personally very wealthy. What's wrong with that, right? As long as you're not killing people and you're not making stretchy pants that show the undersides of women like Chip Wilson or whatever. But that's what I think is a fundamental problem, um, and I think it's a cultural problem, right? And it's just a shift. And I wouldn't be thinking about this had I not worked and lived in Silicon Valley for a number of years, and lived and worked in Asia Pacific, and lived and worked in other places. But we're in this sort of echo chamber, and sometimes I think the only people who are really kind of trying to diagnose it are the people who've actually started enterprises and businesses and succeeded or failed or still in the arena struggling, right? So and I think that when I look at this with the benefit of comparisons, that yeah, that is a fundamental issue.
No, no, there's a lot of validity in what you're talking about, and it's. I wish it was simpler, Handle. I wish you just gave like the solution. Cultural shift is that's a relatively tall order.
That's beyond, yeah, that's beyond my pay grade. That's not, like even with the billions of people watching this podcast,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. But you know what? I don't want to take up too much more of our time, Handel. I know we're very over time, but this has been a fantastic conversation. Costas, do you have any questions for Handel to end things off or wrap things up
No,
here?
I think that it's been a fascinating look into an incredible Canadian company, looking at the future of where drug discovery could potentially go. From my perspective, it's leaps and bounds from where I started learning about designing drugs and pharmacology. But I wish you nothing but success.
Thank you. And we're not anywhere near the finish line. I mean, we're just
No.
still limbering up, and it's a long journey, and we hope we make it. We hope we're successful. We hope that we have the benefit of, like, you know, spreading that success and some capital back into the ecosystem so we can continue this, because it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. It's really hard, but you know, some days you want to wake up and because you're building something that you think is going to be of tremendous value and impact to the world. And really thank you guys for giving people, like me, a forum to talk. And I've had a great time. I haven't had so much fun, well, not for a while. We've been working really hard, so I appreciate you guys indulging, my flights of fancy and my harsh statements, and so
No,
really appreciate
this
it.
is great. No, this is great. And just on a personal note for myself, it's very, very rare in Canada to have really an Asian Canadian kind of being the forefront of such a technological revolution, right? So I very much appreciate that. I'm very, very proud. Hopefully you go out there and kick ass for us, Not to say that you should represent all Asian Canadians, not to add that additional, weight on your shoulders as well.
Like, I don't want to be the K-pop demon hunters of biotech, although maybe actually that's not a bad thing, right? So yeah, that's a great movie, by the way. Just keep watching it on repeat. So
So
thank you
I'm
guys.
wondering, where can people find you? Because I'm looking at, so you definitely, LinkedIn seems like an area where people can find you. Handle Kim, and it'll be in the show notes. I do notice that you have a Twitter account as well, Handle Kim, HANDOLKIM. Is those the best place to find you at? And of course, Variational AI, spelled VARIATIONAL.ai. And of course, we'll put all this information in the show notes below. But anywhere else people can kind of keep tabs with you, Handle, and of course, Variational AI.
No, I mean, for anyone who follows me on Twitter or X, they're going to be disappointed because I don't think I've tweeted in this decade. So I really don't keep that current. And if you DM me, I'm not going to see it because I don't go there. But yeah, I mean, reach out on LinkedIn, and you know, happy to talk, and help, especially if you're a biotech CSO or head of discovery that needs to get some novel leads really quick to help with your program. So we're always open to helping, and we'd love to have more Canadian customers as well. We'd like to really kind of help Canadian biopharma adopt AI at scale. And given the fact that we're only one of two companies that are doing this, we're happy to split it with the other players as well. So, but we'll give you the Maple Leaf discount. So.
Excellent. Excellent. At least the discount in terms of like the exchange rate is much better that way, anyways. But thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us on this exceptional episode with Handol Kim and of course my co-host Kostas. So thank you very much. If you please like and subscribe below. If any comments, you can comment below as well. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.